Very few public health officials in this country seem very interested in public health, in case you haven't noticed. The Surgeon General of Florida, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, is an exception to that. He is interested in the health of the people of his state, and because he's taken a close look at what's in the COVID vax, the one that everyone in the country was required to take not so long ago. And he's come up short. He can't answer some basic questions about it, and that's a concern if we're doing science, which he is. And so he has now called on doctors to immediately stop giving the mRNA COVID vax to their patients, and for a very interesting reason that you should know about. Here's his statement. We're quoting. I'm calling for a halt to the use of mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have always played it fast and loose with COVID-19 vaccine safety, but their failure to test for DNA integration with the human genome, as their own guidelines dictate, when the vaccines are known to be contaminated with foreign DNA, is intolerable. Think about that. It's one thing if it gives you a heart attack. If it tampers with your DNA in some way, now we have a real problem, considering 1 billion people got it. So in a recent interview about the mRNA vaccines, the Surgeon General of Florida described them this way.
These vaccines have DNA in them. Everyone knows what DNA is. They're contaminated with DNA, and that's not necessarily a big deal. But it's a problem with these vaccines because the DNA hangs on with the mRNA and goes into people's cells. So this is a completely different risk analysis than other products that have had DNA. These vaccines are honestly, they're the antichrist of all products.
The antichrist of all products. The Surgeon General of Florida joins us now to explain what he means. Doctor, thank you so much for coming on. I remember at the beginning of the vax mandates, there were people on the fringes, as we say, who raised questions about the potential of this drug, this brand new, this novel vaccine, which wasn't really a vaccine, to affect people's DNA. And they were immediately described as crazy. Tell us your concerns, if you wouldn't mind fleshing out a little bit what we saw in that clip.
You know, it's so interesting to hear you say that, Tucker, because I had the same impression when people very early on were citing concerns about DNA. I think that really what was happening is that their intuition was informing them about a potential problem with these vaccines. And, you know, you showed that clip there. This one is sometimes I feel quite guilty dragging people through the scientific details, but I try and do it at a level that hopefully won't bore people to death or be too painful, because it is a very important issue, and it's not a complicated issue. And it's important for people to recognize the difference between the honest facts, which is what I'm sharing, and the spin and dodge and look over here that you hear Dr. Califf at the FDA and other, Dr. Offit, other people sharing. So it's actually very simple. We all know what DNA is. This is our genetic blueprint, our gift from God. And this DNA can be affected, and that can be obviously a very bad thing. Sometimes it's affected in a way that makes people sick. Sometimes it can even be affected in a way that leads people to pass on characteristics to their offspring. In this particular case with the mRNA vaccines, they have DNA in them like many other vaccines or other biologic type of medications. And that, as I've said previously, is not such a big deal, because fortunately DNA is not some big hairy monster that can live forever when it's foreign in people's bodies. Our bodies have lots of mechanisms to break them down. But the problem here is that for the same reason that scientists won a Nobel Prize, this DNA isn't like other DNA in terms of having a very hard time penetrating into cells. This DNA hangs on with mRNA in that lipid nanoparticle that people hear and frankly probably roll their eyes over. It hangs on with it, and it comes into the cells almost certainly hitchhiking along with the mRNA. So whereas in the past, DNA would have a very hard time even entering cells, here the DNA is getting delivered into cells with the lipid nanoparticles. And that's a problem. And that's a problem because each dose of mRNA COVID-19 vaccine probably contains, it's been estimated, between billions and hundreds of billions of fragments of DNA. So this is a completely different risk analysis. That is obvious. You don't need a PhD to be able to figure that out. And the FDA's own guidance about contaminating DNA, published guidance, their words, never referred to by them, by the way, in their counter-arguments, but their words are that there are situations when you need to confirm that DNA that is a contaminant or foreign DNA is not integrating into human DNA, into the human genome. And there are specific tests, sequencing tests, to do this, to make sure it's done. And what we did is we asked the FDA, well, have you done this? You've acknowledged this risk. Have you done this? And they came back with about 10,000 words talking about everything from what time the sun sets in China to, their third cousin's, bar mitzvah, and nothing about the specific question we asked, along with other questions, by the way, but nothing about that, which leads me to conclude they haven't done it, which is, it starts at crazy, but it ends at somewhere else. That someone could be just so nonchalant and frankly willy-nilly with something as precious and as as sacred as our human DNA. So that's a summary, Tucker.
Do you think it's conceivably possible that the mRNA vaccines change people's DNA, or could?
It's absolutely possible. I mean, I wouldn't have issued this call to halt their use if that wasn't possible. On a factual basis, it is absolutely possible. There's zero question about that. Now, the real question is whether it is happening, if it is happening, the degree to which it's happening, the location of affected cells, and the potential for that to cause, whether it's cancer or heritable characteristics, or that is to say that is it affecting things like a woman's eggs or a man's sperm, such that it could be passed on, or whatever else it potentially could be causing. But it absolutely is a possibility. There's zero question about that. The real question is whether it's a possibility worth investigating. The obvious answer is yes, even though the FDA and Peter Marks, wants you to believe that the answer is no.
Well, that would change humanity if that were happening forever.
And frankly, just considering the evil frequency from the beginning of this pandemic, the lockdowns, the forcing people to stay at home, the not allowing people to say bye-bye to people they love, just all the horrific things, the firing of people who stuck it out during the pandemic but then passed on the vaccine after the vaccines were available. All the evil that has defined the frequency of policies during this pandemic, sadly, I hate that is a possibility, but sadly, I would not be at all surprised. In fact, I think it's probably likely that is in fact happening.
You think it's likely happening that humanity itself is being changed forever by this round of mRNA vaccines?
Yes, I do. And that's based on just the things that I just said and the fact that it is possible. So again, the question is it actually happening? And frankly, my instinctive feeling is that totally it's happening. The extent to which it's happening, the degree to which it's happening, any particular lots for which it's worse or sort of less prominent. And those are questions that should be characterized. But if I had to place a bet on what the likely answer to that question is, yeah, I do think that it's probably happening. I think it would be right in step and in sync with every terrible, horrible thing that we've seen happen during the pandemic as a result of people abandoning common sense, abandoning reason, abandoning humanity in pursuit of whatever their ideological or profit-fueled or greed-based or greed-fueled desire is. Yeah, I think it would be quite consistent with that.
Well, I'm shocked, but I guess I'm not that shocked. So let me say
Right.
something I've never said to anybody, but I've just noticed, and it always has felt a little crackpot to me, so I've never expressed it. Do you think it's possible that after getting the mRNA shot, that people's personalities might change in ways that you would notice?
We're going to enter a spiritual domain here, Tucker. So I am, as you know, I went to medical school at Harvard. I got a PhD while I was in medical school. I've had multiple NIH grants, did research full-time along with taking care of patients before entering this position as Surgeon General of Florida, thanks to Governor DeSantis. And I've got to tell you that, during the pandemic, you'd sometimes hear people say that this is a spiritual war. And it's a funny thing for people to say, but instinctively and intuitively, I remember the first time I heard it sort of yelled out in the middle of a press conference with Governor DeSantis out here in, I think, Bradenton, Florida. I responded immediately that yes, to the person in the audience who said, yes, it is a spiritual war. And it absolutely is. And this has to do with intuition. Again, I've left the MD, PhD hat, and I'm talking just as a human being and someone who, like many of us, guide their lives based on how they feel, what they feel about what truth is and what resonates. And I got to tell you that truly, I think in terms of the toll, we've heard different estimates for their potential contribution to excess mortality. I think that probably is the case, that they contribute. And I think that is just a part of what is, frankly, bad and evil behind the intention of these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines and the whole entire pandemic policy approach. And I got to tell you that I do believe that it can change things that you would not expect to change from people just taking a typical vaccine like the flu vaccine.
So not just their physical health, but also their mental state. I mean, I guess why wouldn't it?
Right, yeah. And I actually wouldn't say so much mental. And again, we are, this is Joe, the dad and the husband and the man speaking with you here. But yeah, there's unfortunately there's absolutely an evil underlying frequency to these products. And, it's something that I felt early, but just over time and frankly, with my own spiritual development and spiritual growth and power, in terms of my connection to, God and other people, and just to the gifts that God gives each of us, and with each of us having different degrees of access to those gifts because of our journeys in life. These mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, and I'm not talking about the technology in general. I'm not talking about other technologies. I'm talking about these particular products. Unfortunately, yes, early on, no doubt, were they effective at reducing illness from COVID-19? Yeah, the data were very strong. Now it's completely unclear. There's data that actually points the opposite direction in terms of negative effectiveness and lots of other problems. But despite what they may have provided in terms of benefits specifically targeted toward COVID-19 illness or death, they have caused much worse in terms of not only adverse events, but also, again, at a spiritual level, there's something that I intuitively am certain is wrong with this particular technology and these particular products.
Well, of course, I couldn't agree more. But back just briefly to the public policy questions around this. So, one, didn't the U.S. government, the Biden administration, the Trump administration before them, have an obligation to tell the population, to tell the world, this product that we're going to force you to take could change your DNA, or that foreign DNA is going to enter your cells? I mean, because I think we know that to be true. And I don't believe
Absolutely.
that anyone knew that in the public. Why wouldn't they tell us that?
Yeah, so you're right. Pardon me. And, it goes back to the Trump administration and, Dr. Fauci and other people who were involved in Operation Warp Speed. And it goes all the way back there. And again, Tucker, I think what helps make this make sense, a sad sense, is that you look back at the forces. I mean, incredibly powerful forces that were exerted and projected on the earth, and and the populations on this earth at the start of this pandemic, incredibly powerful forces in terms of their imposition of a view about how to approach the pandemic that consumed everything. And part of what it consumed was common sense. Part of what it consumed was prudence. Part of what it consumed was good judgment. Part of what it consumed was human-centeredness. Part of what it consumed was heart-centeredness. And so when you have all of those things happening, then stuff that's obvious, like, there's DNA, and now it's with lipid nanoparticles, so it's not like other vaccines. This is DNA that is almost certainly going to make it into your cells, billions of fragments of it with each dose. And this is not even mentioning the SV40 enhancer promoter DNA that was part of Pfizer's, that is a specially bad type of DNA in terms of entering people's cells. I mean, those are obvious questions, but with all those forces that were exerted, and unfortunately no force that was loud enough and strong enough to counterbalance it. There were people that of, I mean, I was one of them too, who early on were saying, this doesn't make sense, slow it down, slow your roll, let's think about things, let's be sensible, let's be human-centered. Those voices were no match at that time for the forces that were being exerted and pressed onto the consciousness of the population. And so basic important things never got asked, like, what do you do when you close the lockdown? What does it mean when you stop kids from being able to play outside? What does it mean when you stop young people from being able to pursue their dreams and their education and whatever other pursuits they have in mind? Those things were squeezed out because of the forces that were in place.
Really one of the most shocking conversations I've ever had in my life. The Surgeon General of Florida, Dr. Joseph Ladapo, thank you very much for joining us. It doesn't give you much confidence in the American media that huge events can happen in foreign countries, not even that far away, say in Europe. Big events, mass movements that will change the course of history, and pretty much no one in the United States has any idea that any of it is happening, much less why. Something like that is happening right now in Germany, the most powerful country in Europe, our key NATO ally. Ava, thanks so much for joining us. Can you describe what's happening and then tell us why you think it is?
Hi, Tucker. Yes. Well, thank you for having me, because what you said is correct. A lot of media are absolutely ignoring the massive protests that are going on right now in Germany. As you know, I'm from the Netherlands, and we are neighboring countries to Germany, and I've been very involved in the protests of the farmers over in my home country. And when I heard that the German farmers were going out to protest, I thought to myself, I need to be there. The reason the German farmers are protesting right now is actually because a decision by the German government sparked a lot of anger. The German government has decided to basically eliminate a tax break on agricultural diesel. And that's not just, the only thing that they've done in the past few years to attack and basically harass the German farmers. The German farmers are subjected, just like the Dutch farmers and a lot of farmers around the Western world, to all sorts of new regulations and restrictions all of the time. And quite frankly, they feel unheard, they feel unwanted, they feel like they are being harassed off of their land, basically. And they are sick and tired of feeling like they have no right to exist. And so the German farmers have announced huge protests, and those have started on Monday with massive roadblocks nationwide. And this is a protest that we haven't seen in this type of magnitude in Germany ever before. So I've been traveling all around the country following the farmers. We were on the A2, the busiest highway in Germany, on Monday, where thousands of tractors backed up by actually German truckers performed massive roadblocks and basically paralyzed the country for for at least a few hours. And the protests are still ongoing every day all around the nation. And if you would listen to the mainstream media, you either wouldn't know it was happening, or you would be hearing that democracy is being overthrown. So that's why I decided to come out to Germany and cover the protests and support the farmers here.
May I ask a simple question? Why would the government of Germany or of the Netherlands or of France or of the United States, why would you mess with the farmers? You're going to get food shortages. Why would you discourage people from growing food? That seems strange.
Right. Well, so there is a global attack on farming going on. And all of this, of course, is happening under the banner, under the pretext of, again, saving the planet, right? They say it's about climate change, and farming, a profession that is centuries old, so to say, is now being pointed at as the main cause of it. And we've seen that in the Netherlands, we've seen that here in Germany, and that's why they're saying that they now need to get rid of these benefits or these tax breaks for diesel, because diesel is bad and farming is bad, etc. But it's obviously ridiculous. I mean, I think that the elites in our countries have completely forgotten where their food comes from. I mean, these farmers, the people that I see out there going out to protest, these are one of the most hardworking groups in society. You know, they work 24/7. They're hands-on people. They provide us with our daily meals, and the only thing that they say is, leave us alone. Let us do our jobs. You know, these are people that I would say now by the progressives are seen as backwards, or seen as people from, you know, far away times. But these are hardworking, normal people that deserve our support fully. And I mean, this is something that is, like I said, going on not just in Germany, but it's everywhere. And the protests are widely supported by ordinary people, by blue-collar workers who generally, I think, feel that they have an establishment that despises them, that doesn't listen to them, that taxes them more and more and more, and spends their money on things that are not in their best interest. And that's something that you hear all over at all of these farmers' protests. They're not just saying, hey, you know, we need to get rid of these new measurements. They are basically saying we need to get rid of the government. The government needs to step down. We are sick and tired of being unwanted. We are sick and tired of being unheard. And we want to be able to continue to do our jobs without being taxed into oblivion by an establishment that doesn't have our interests at heart.
Can I ask, if you take two steps back, Germany's behavior seems, well, suicidal. I mean, the German government allowed the Biden administration to destroy their main source of natural gas, Nord Stream, which crippled the German economy, and it will for generations if it ever recovers. And now they're coming out against farms where food comes from, which will lead to starvation. That looks like a country bent on killing itself.
Yes, like I said, the general message that I hear here from people is that they feel that they are being ruled by people who hate them. And I think that they're right. The establishment in Germany seems to hate everything that the farmers, the blue-collar workers, the ordinary German citizens stand for. And that's why these protests are so massively important. And that's also why they are now trying to shut it down by, again, vilifying the people that are going out on the streets and protesting for their right to exist, basically. If you come after a group that produces food, if you come after farmers, you know, I don't think you are on team humanity, so to say.
No, you're not on team. Yes, it's a very good point. What's the media, as a non-German speaker, I wouldn't know, what's the media coverage like of these protests in Germany?
Well, they are obviously trying very, very hard to demonize the farmers and to say, oh, these are all far-right extremists that are here to overthrow a legitimately elected government. When in fact, like I said, these are ordinary people. Everybody I've spoken to is just there because they are rightfully so very much upset at the fact that they are paying for what I would say is their own destruction. You know, they're not stupid. They are seeing that the German government and in general Western governments who are under, I would say, globalist rule, are spending millions and millions and billions of euros on causes that either don't exist, like a non-existing climate crisis, or they're spending it on development aid in Africa, or they're spending it on a war in Ukraine that isn't theirs, and then the ordinary people of these countries have to pay for that. And that's exactly what they are fed up with. That's what they're sick and tired of. And that's why they've gone out to protest. And I really feel, Tucker, that this is an uprising, not just of the farmers, but an uprising of ordinary, hardworking, honest people against the establishment. You know, the deplorables, as Hillary Clinton called them, you know, those people are now saying enough is enough, and they are stepping up against our governments and against the global elites.
An extremist farmer. I don't think there's ever been an extremist farmer. They rely on nature to grow crops. You can't be an extremist. That's like, it's hilarious but sad. Ava, thank you for following this for us, and we'll check back with you. Appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you so much for covering it, Tucker.